We've certainly had founders who paint the picture of everything's amazing. Oh yeah, everything's amazing. And like the fourth or fifth time you hear that over the course of a year, you're thinking, I know everything's not amazing because startup life is a roller coaster. And if someone's not sharing the lower parts of the roller coaster with you, you know something's up at that point.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Liberty Ventures podcast. I'm Alexander McCoben, founder and CEO of Liberty Ventures. And in service of our purpose to build the ecosystem of values-aligned business leaders, investors, executives, and entrepreneurs who are all committed to a free and prosperous future and to help you scale your businesses to scale your impact, I am just absolutely thrilled to be joined today by Danielle Strachman from 1517. Now, I'll be honest, Danielle and I have been in the same orbit for a very long time. We have a lot of mutual friends and colleagues. And Danielle, I am just so honored that you're joining the podcast now and we get the chance to have this conversation finally.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and just a real joy to be here, and love the work that you have done over the last decade. So really amazing to follow along and now be here together with you.
Well, this is a mutual appreciation and admiration society because I've been so impressed by what you've done over the last decade as well. And I want to give you a chance to explain not only what you've done with the Thiel Fellowship in 1517, but just everything leading up to that as well that's led to who you are and what you're up to today.
Sure, absolutely. Gosh. Um, it's interesting to be here on this podcast because, yeah, there's like probably parts of the story that are going to be more relevant to you and your audience that, maybe are less relevant for other people I talk to and whatnot. So one of those things that actually is probably part of the early journey is being part of an objectivist club a long, long time ago, like 20 years ago. And that really helping to solidify some of my thinking around supporting high capacity people who maybe other people don't take seriously. And was part of the Boston Objectivist Network when I was about 19 years old, for a few years, and still friends with some of those people, and actually really had some very formative experiences. A friend of mine, this was in Massachusetts, a good friend of mine was running for office in Massachusetts on the Libertarian ticket, and he needed people to go door to door to get signatures for his campaign. This is David Eichner, for anyone who might be familiar with Dave. But I had to go door to door and ask people if we could get this guy on the ballot. And, he was running on the Libertarian ticket. And in Massachusetts, that's like sacrilegious. I mean, people called me devil worshiper, all kinds of stuff. But it also really got me outside my comfort zone. Before doing that, I was an extremely introverted, shy young lady. But I felt very called to support Dave and what he was doing, and especially being part of this group where we would talk about, philosophy and politics. All of a sudden there was this chance to enact it in the real world and help Dave to, maybe if we thought, okay, there's probably a snowball's chance in hell he's going to win this, but just the idea of getting him on the ballot, which we did do, and have him just be a known quantity is great. It's quite a formative experience for a 19-year-old to have. But I think some of that background plays very much into how I think about working with young people. And after actually being in Boston, I moved to San Diego and I started working with homeschoolers a lot, who are also very freedom loving people, whether or not they categorize themselves in any particular party. But it was also working with those homeschoolers and homeschool moms predominantly, and learning about sort of their take on the world and why they were going outside of the system to educate their children. And also just seeing the real, like, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed nature of those children. I'll never forget the first homeschooler who I worked with. And I had read about homeschooling philosophy and I knew about it, but there's always something different about getting the visceral experience with something. And when I started working with homeschoolers, it was that like light bulb moment going off for me of, I'll never forget this woman, Nancy. She was the first homeschooling family that reached out to me about tutoring services because I had a tutoring company. And all the children ran to the door, 5 of them. Oh, Danielle's here. Can we do reading today and math? And can we do some history? Can we work on a project? Can you stay for 2 extra hours today? And I was like, wow, Nancy's kids are amazing. And part of me was wondering, is this just Nancy's kids or is this like a homeschooling thing? And as I got deeper and deeper into the homeschooling world, I really saw that this like following and respecting of children's paths was, a theme throughout. And was something that very much influenced how I thought about educating young people and working with young people. And so when I came to the Thiel Foundation, a lot of what I wanted to bake in was just an older young person's homeschool program. But yeah, it was working with those homeschoolers that really gave me the um, real like philosophical educational underpinning for how we would work with people like the Thiel Fellows and the Thiel Fellowship program. And that is also true with 1517, being able to um, come forward and treating young people with respect and dignity and taking their ideas seriously, and not just taking their ideas seriously, but giving them resources, whether that was at the fellowship in terms of money, time, mentors. And we do the same thing with 1517 as investment. We also have a grant program also, but there's something about telling a young person, hey, not only do I take your ideas seriously, but I'm going to give you resources to enact on this. And a lot of the founders we work with have a strong mission orientation to um, really have an impact in a very substantial way on a technology or a population. And it's just really a blessing to be able to do that with them. But a lot of that philosophy started working with those homeschooling moms and trying to understand, like, well, how did you all get on this journey? And in fact, an hour ago, I was meeting with one of my founders for the first time, who is from the Philippines, and he brought his whole family over, and I got to meet all his sisters and his new baby. And actually it's him and his dad who started this company 14 years ago, and he was something like 8 years old when he was working with his dad on this company. And I said, like, oh, okay, like what was going on for you for school? And he's like, oh, well, we were homeschooled. And I was like, oh wow, you were homeschooled, like that's amazing. And I said to the dad, I was like, well, how did you get into homeschooling? And he said, oh, it has nothing to do with me, it's my wife. She's just a staunch supporter of the homeschooling movement. She tells everybody about it. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I still need to meet the mom. She sounds like an incredible woman. And I got to meet a bunch of the sisters today who are homeschooling and taking gap years. And they're doing it very much against the grain because it's not a typical thing to do in the Philippines. And so I'm very curious about what that has been like for them, because most of the homeschoolers I have known have been in the U.S. But yeah, that's a little background, a little bit of the pedagogy that sits underneath what we do in our work, both at the Thiel Foundation when we were there and also with 1517.
That is just absolutely amazing on so many levels, and I wanna make a few connections here, but first off, for anyone who doesn't know what the Thiel Fellowship is or what 1517's thesis is, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the original idea of the Thiel Fellowship was to provide grants to young people who either didn't go to college or dropped out of college to build incredible businesses to create more value in the world, and 1517 carries that mission on, not just by giving them grants, but by investing in those same kinds of founders to go and do amazing things.
Yes, absolutely. And our big overarching thing is that we really want to show that there's not one path for all and that you can learn by doing. And that, 1517 is called 1517 because of the year of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther, sometimes we say he had the first listicle, and he nailed his 95 Theses to the church door and said, hey, there's this big institution, the church, saying you have to buy this expensive piece of paper, and this is wrong. And likewise, today we say there's another big institution, the higher ed industrial complex, if you will. And they are also telling people, hey, you have to buy this extremely crazy inflated piece of paper to be called an educated person. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now today. And so we are very much in protest of that. And we want to support people who are going against that grain, in part to inspire future generations to be able to do the same.
Now, I remember when the Thiel Fellowship was first created. I was running Students for Liberty at the time, and so I was talking with some young people who were really excited by this. There was a lot of blowback to this idea, and a lot of people really opposed to it.
Yes. Yeah, it's so interesting because the fellowship this year is turning 14 years old, 15, 17 is turning 9 years old, and I talk to high school groups a lot. And when I talk to high schoolers, it's really dawned on me this year, wow, you were born when this program started, which means that you don't have the context of what it used to be like. And now it is still maybe like atypical for a young person not to go to school, but what is typical now is to talk about the choice. And so parents nowadays will say, hey, let's talk about if higher ed is the right path for you. Let's talk about the cost. Let's talk about other ways that you can, have a fulfilling career and what that might look like. 14 years ago, this was blasphemy. So when we kicked off the fellowship with the first group of Thiel Fellows, I remember, we worked with a great media team and they told us, pretty standard information. They said, typical media cycle, even when it's like really grandiose, is 2 weeks. Like no one's listening to anything you say after 2 weeks. That's just kind of how it happens. And I remember we went for almost 2 months straight. People were constantly calling the foundation for a quote about the higher ed bubble. This term, the higher ed bubble, that you can actually see the spike in Google searches for it after the foundation launch because Peter was talking about it. Um, and it was very controversial. And I think what's hard, and I noticed this in the homeschooling world as well. So it wasn't particularly surprising, but interesting to see it on a global scale. When someone says, hey, you know what? Someone can do something different than what you've done, what we as humans tend to hear is, oh, then what I've done is wrong. Or is somehow not as good or good enough. And so I've seen this with homeschoolers where when they say, like, oh yeah, we're homeschooling our kids, other people can get so defensive about it. Now that's starting to change too, where people are like, oh, cool, they made a choice for themselves. It's really nice to see that. But for a long time, it was, oh, well, why are you doing it? Why don't you think public or private school is good, or why not this or that? And it was the same thing with the Thiel Foundation, where when we came out and said, hey, you know what, maybe college isn't for everybody. And, the headline conscious decision making around your education doesn't exactly sell a headline. And we don't, anyone who's done media knows they don't get to write their own headlines. So the blasphemous headlines of like Peter says no one should go to college or young people shouldn't go to college, definitely helped them sell some papers. But people would be very confronted because I think what they would hear is someone saying, sort of, one, the emperor has no clothes, and two, maybe the thing I put a lot of time and effort and money into may not be worth it. That's a scary proposition. We were called the most misguided piece of philanthropy by Larry Summers, and what was really shocking to us was we always thought that people would attack the foundation, Peter, like we were ready for that. Like we were ready for that debate and that battle. But what we found was that some people were just so nasty to the young people that we worked with and going after them and saying, well, your project isn't ambitious enough, or, who do you think you are that you don't need to go to school right now? And that was the most shocking thing of all, actually, about the media, was that media started picking on, 16 through 20-year-olds that we were working with in the program. And what I always said about our program was that it's a 2-year program with a 10-year timeline. It's not going to be that at the end of this fellowship, someone has, cured cancer. It's going to be that they're on the path to doing these types of things. And now we can point at people like Laura Deming, who started the Longevity Fund, and say, hey, yeah, she is helping therapeutics come to market. She is helping a better quality of life. And she started her fund to fund novel research in these arenas when she was 16 years old.
Well, you've got a lot of examples now to challenge the critics there. I mean, you guys supported Vitalik, mispronounce his last name, who created Ethereum during the fellowship. Like how just I think you may know the numbers. What are some of the numbers for just how much wealth has been created, how much value has been created by fellows, and perhaps you're even willing to share just how well 1517's done by investing in them too.
This is a good. I used to know. It's funny. It's been a while since I've like looked at the Thiel Fellowship numbers off the top of my head, but the value creation is in the tens of billions, and on that like market level. But then when you look at things like Vitalik with Ethereum and really changing how we think about uh, you know currency and governance and all these different things, and I knew things were getting really funky when my mom mentioned Vitalik at Thanksgiving. Like, I don't talk about my work a lot. I'm not like mentioning Vitalik with my family, and then all of a sudden she's bringing up Ethereum, and I'm like, wow, we have really hit the mainstream here. This is really interesting. Someone like Austin Russell, who has invented a LiDAR system for autonomous driving, that is coming out in the latest Volvo that is being launched this year. He has over 1,000 employees at his company, Luminar Technologies, and he's going to be saving lives. It's like that's going to be really incredible to have just this wonderful technology out there. And so it's both like economic prosperity, technological prosperity, and that trickles down to all of us. And so we're very excited about these types of things. And yes, all these people do not have college degrees.
Now, I want to tie it into 1517, but before that, go back to I see this, your story leading up to this. The homeschooling connection seems pretty obvious to me, and that's fantastic. But you even mentioned that your objectivist group background prepared you for this, and you didn't say it, but it almost sounds like you are you're out there trying to find the John Galts, the Howard Rourks, and you're actually discovering them and supporting them early on in the development of their careers.
Yeah, I mean I think that's a very generous way to say it. Like, I think philosophically that is what we are looking for. It's like these outlier people that institutions and society might say like, "Hey, this is ridiculous. You can't do this big grandiose thing." And it's again that they call it tall poppy syndrome. When someone thinks that they're going to be, it's like, oh, you think you're better than other people. And it's like, no, this person doesn't think they're better than other people. It's that they have a calling that they are being pulled into and they are enacting on that. And we're here to support that. And so I think there's something about Ayn Rand's philosophy around the individual and courageousness and things like that, that is also a place that like myself and Michael come from. And it's funny. It's not like, like it's not like hit over the head, like, hey, like, I don't know, everyone has to read The Virtue of Selfishness or something like that. But it's more, hey, these were some of our formative experiences that certainly have an effect on, how we think about, the future of what we do, and just like the future in general.
100%. And I actually, I will be generous enough and say that I think you are discovering the Howard Works, the John Galt's out there. These are young people who are bucking the trend, who society says you can't build this. No one's done it before. You haven't even gone through the traditional educational system. Who are you to do something so different? And they are changing the world with these products.
Yep. No, I concur. And it's for me, it is super humbling. It's like, wow, there's a lot of investors out there who are like, yeah, I'm a swashbuckling risk taker and they're sort of like all about them and how risky they are or something like that. And for us, we think of ourselves as really being of service to these types of people who want to take these giant leaps. And yeah, I mean, it's been incredible and very humbling to work with people like this. And it's been incredible and humbling even to work with the people where they didn't make the impact that they want because they tried so hard with all the good intent in the world. But sometimes like markets change or a world event happens that is going to get in the way, that is going to be something where you're going to say, okay, like right now is not the time for me to be spending energy on this. And so we're both so humbled by all the founders we work with, no matter what the outcome is, because it really does take this incredible grit and courage to go out there and go against the grain, like what you're saying. And so for us, I mean, it's just truly a pleasure.
I can only imagine, and especially as we're getting going from Liberty Ventures on the venture side, it is incredible to work with these entrepreneurs and to back them. You want the best results possible, but independent of what happens this time around, because if we're picking the right ones, they're incredible entrepreneurs, and it's about supporting them over the long run with this too.
And that's something that is really starting to hit us now as we're starting to move into doing the venture side for a decade. Um, and it's funny, I'm really experiencing that there's the idea of being able to work with someone for the long haul, and then there's the actual being able to do it. And it's just so great. I mean, we have founders who've been working on their companies for 8 years, and yeah, I mean, they blood, sweat, and tears and all of it. Some of them have been extremely successful. People like Austin from Luminar Technologies, that was one of our first investments. The guys from Loom were acquired last year, just shy of $1 billion. And amazing to watch the journeys there. Um, and now we also see what's interesting too. Like we had a couple founders in Fund One who were acquired. It was the workflow team. They made an app that was acquired by Apple. It was not a venture fund return, but personally, it was quite a good return. And then, we've worked with those guys as investors in our fund now, and they just started a new company, and we just invested in them again. And so it's like really interesting to be able to work with people like in that long haul, and there's just different narratives at play going throughout. And so it's been um, a really amazing experience to like be like, yeah, these people are fantastic. Of course, we're going to write a check into their new company. And yeah, I see that long haul is going to be a multi-decade thing, which I don't think I conceptualized when we were starting 15, 17. Like we would say, oh, we get to work for the long haul with people. But now I'm like getting the sense of that feeling of, oh, wow, like, yeah, this is what the long haul feels like. And then personally, we really get to know our founders as people. And so especially since we work with young people, it's really amazing to go to their weddings and, hear about the birth of their children. And we send out 15, 17 onesies when people have babies. And so at the end of the year, when we do our limited partner meeting for our investors, we always have an angel investment slide, and it's a picture of all it's like Pixar. We do picture of all the babies that were born that year, ideally in their 15, 17 swag. And it's just really great to watch people personally and professionally. Yeah, there's really nothing like it.
That I love all of this, and so want to start diving into the actual investing side. Now, let's talk about the way you work with entrepreneurs, yeah, especially in thinking about you actually developing these long-term relationships. I love that story of you investing in an entrepreneur, they exit, they become an investor with you, you're invested in them now. What can entrepreneurs do to develop really good relationships with either you or other investors who back them to have that kind of long-term relationship?
Sure, gosh. For us, it's really about being genuine. It's about sharing, hey, here's what's working really well, and here's what is not working well. Because we also know that not everything is roses all the time. And we've certainly had founders who paint the picture of everything's amazing. Oh, yeah, everything's amazing. And like the fourth or fifth time you hear that over the course of a year, you're thinking, I know everything's not amazing, because startup life is a roller coaster. And if someone's not sharing the lower parts of the roller coaster with you, something's up at that point. So that genuineness is really important, and really just that human connection too, of understanding who these people are, them understanding us as people. Um, yeah, it's just very dynamic. It's not just about like the company update. It's about, hey, how are you doing as a person? We also think from a leadership perspective that how they're doing and checking in with them and what their experience is like being a leader is important. And we ask them all the time, hey, when was the last time you saw your family? When was the last time you cooked a good meal for yourself, like, or for other people? I have founders over for dinner at my house all the time, where I'm like, hey, like, let's have an extended sit down, and not just, okay, we've got 45 minutes or an hour. Let's like get through strategy. And kind of bang it out. I had one founder who was here the other day, and we did bang out a bunch of strategy for an hour. And at the end of the hour, he said, Danielle, can we talk about some dating advice? I really need some dating advice. And I was like, yes, like, let's do it. And so I felt so charmed, like, wow, he really opened up not just about his business, but about what else is going on. And, we had some real frank conversations about dating, which was really, really awesome. And it's been interesting too. I think early on in 15, 17, I may have been a little more skittish on the personal side because I don't want to ever make someone feel like they have to divulge themselves to like work with us or something like that. But at this point, we've also seen that like founders really value that we care about them as a whole person. I always start with open-ended questions like, hey, how's it going? And people are like, you mean the business? I'm like, no, I just mean your life, whatever you want to talk about, wherever it's at. And it gives people a real opening. And it actually, wow, this was quite an amazing moment. I was talking to one of our high school founders recently. I had gone down to his high school to give a talk. And afterwards, we just took this sort of saunter around campus. And he says, Danielle, I got to tell you, there's like some other stuff going on. And I was like, okay, sure. Yeah, whatever you want to talk about. And he says, like this journey of everything I'm building, it's also, making me see like other areas of my life where I need to step up. And I've been helping to repair the relationships in my family. Like, my dad hasn't been that present. And so I went to him this year and talked to him about being more present in our lives and got him, my mom, and my brother together for my brother's birthday. And I was like, and he's 18. And, and I looked at him and I was like, man, I was like, you're a man. Like that is such a brave thing to do. I know 30 and 40-year-olds who would not navigate those waters. And the fact that you're stepping up to the plate just truly amazes me. And he's funny. He's one of these guys who he covers a lot with humor. He's very funny, but I could, his eyes were a little bit teary, and I could tell that like he felt really seen for that contribution to his family. And so we love to have those openings with people. I'm curious for you when you're working with your founders, like, are you like some people are really easy to navigate that like personal stuff with, and some people are very guarded. So I'm curious how you navigate that.
So we're still in the early days of doing this, but over the whole course of my career working with young people, you're right. I think it is important to develop those personal relationships because if you're going to be working together over the long term, you need to have that open relationship. You need to know what's going well in people's lives, what's not going well that's affecting them. And as you said, be there for them as a whole person and think about that because we're not segmented individuals. We are human beings with all kinds of demands and pressures on us, and the whole point of building these businesses and doing things in the world together is to do great things in the world together across the board. So it's something we're still working out at Liberty Ventures right now. But this is even for me just highlighting the importance of us developing those relationships over the long term with our founders.
Yeah, no, very much so. And I know for me, sometimes it starts with just sharing a little something on my side. Like that can sometimes open someone up a little bit, is if you're the first one to share something a little vulnerable where it's like, hey, this week's been pretty good, but there's this one thing, like that can sometimes really open it up for people of like, oh, this is a safe place to share something. And this person isn't wanting to know about personal things because they're really wondering about the company. It's like, no, they're really wondering about me.
I think that's absolutely on point. And, thinking of the founder you're talking about who was willing to bring his family together and step up to really be the adult in the room and work through family challenges, that says something about his character, which I imagine says something even about his ability to be a founder and leader. And want to use that to ask, okay, you guys have an incredible track record of working with some of the best founders over the last 10 to 20 years. What's the secret sauce, or what are you able to share with everyone here for other investors thinking about this, or for other entrepreneurs to think about what they really need to do to be successful here?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I have to plug Michael's book for a second, Paper Belt on Fire, because there are many chapters dedicated. Yeah, I know I'm biased, but I've read the book twice. I love it. It's an action adventure tale with some, different business tips in there and some amazing historical context. But there's a whole chapter in there about different traits that we look for in people and how we do what we do at 15, 17. And I think it can sometimes be jarring for other investors. Because we'll get a diligence call from a investor who wants to know about a company we've invested in. And I think what they're thinking will say is, oh, well, we did all this background research on this space, and this is why we think this is a really great market. And the pilot contracts they have are X, Y, and Z, and all this. But usually for us, the story starts with something like, oh, well, we've known the founder since they were 15 years old. Maybe they were an old applicant to the Thiel Fellowship. Maybe they were someone we met at a hackathon, someone referred by a friend. We got to know them as a maker instead of as a founder first. And then we saw them navigate a lot of different things. And then they came to us with a company one day, and then we said, hey, you know what? We have all these character data points, and just like being a person, you know what I mean? It's like we don't have some uh, data grabbing tool that is telling us this person's going to be amazing. I liken it to like when you meet someone who becomes a best friend. You're like, oh, wow, like this person seems really wonderful. And like we connect really well. And then you keep in touch over time and that relationship develops over time. So a lot of the founders that we work with, we have sometimes known for months or years, or I mean, at this point we're coming up on, some of these people we've known for over a decade. And sometimes we do have to do the, hey, we met someone on a Monday and they need money on a Friday, and to try to do some of that getting to know them process awfully quickly, but that's not our preferred style. So a lot of it is relationship over time. We do things that most investors don't. Like, so for example, we ran a teen camp last year. From an ROI perspective, there is no reason for us to pay for and run a teen camp.
And what do you mean by a team camp? Like a week-long camp in the woods or what?
We did so for us, we piloted it for a weekend. We did a weekend in October because turns out summer camp is hard because all the venues are taken. Teens have their summers planned out sometimes years in advance. So we said, maybe we'll do a fall camp instead. So we did a fall camp in October. We got, a place to do it called Hidden Villa here in the Bay. We put out a light application and said, basically in 2 months from now, from when we put the application out, we're going to do this teen camp where we're going to have 20 teens come here. We're going to do a field trip day in the Bay Area with a bunch of our deep tech companies. And what we wanted to show these young people was that it takes less than you think to get started. So we went around to our companies that were 2 or 3 founders in a warehouse, nondescript, no shiny, pretty things. I mean, the shiny, pretty things was the tech. It was like, whoa, what's under all that tinfoil? Let's talk about that. Um, but really showing them like this is how it gets started. And some of this got started as research and projects and sharing those stories with them. But we had 20 young people from ages 14 to 19 there. And it was really wonderful to get to know them. And some of them have become grantees of ours over time. A couple of them have pitched us for funding. We're not quite ready there. We have funded high school teams, so we're not afraid to do that. But we haven't gotten there yet on like, making an investment in like a team from this camp yet, but it's going to happen. I know that's going to happen. And so it's this very long game of, we've seen over time that, maybe one of the 14-year-olds in camp will come back 5-6 years later and say, hey, I went to that camp you guys had, and now I'm working on something. And I want to talk to you guys about it because you're going to take me seriously, listen and offer resources. And so it really is about looking at people's character over time, which most investors like haven't built a community around and haven't built a system around doing that. Um, and it's not something people typically value.
Most investors, especially at this early stage, do seem to just rely on the idea, and they say it's about the people, but they've learned about the people for a week or a month, and you're talking about years here, which is really interesting, especially from such a young age.
Yeah, no, so it's very much for us, the I call it planting seeds. It's like we're going places. We are talking at high schools. This is why we have our grant program, the Medici Project, is to give a young person $1,000 to just work on something and see what happens. And we just say it's a goodwill and rapport builder with makers. The outcome is not supposed to be that they're doing a startup or anything like that. I gave one of these grants. We have had grantees very quickly move on to making companies, but I have a grantee who's building a unicycle. And I'm like, that's great. Like, I want you to learn how to build a unicycle. Let's do this. Um, so it's about giving people those experiences. So yeah, we're quite different in how we do things, and what we're kind of looking for. We've come up with a whole lexicon of the traits that we look for that are in Michael's book. I'll go over one real quick, which is what we call hyperfluency. It's this ability to talk backwards and forwards ad nauseum about a space. It's like when you talk to someone who's really passionate about something and you feel like you're on the edge of your seat talking to them because they're so into it. Now, I also think on our side, it takes a certain personality type to want to listen to someone who's just like really going on and on about their thing. But we love that. Like that is our jam at 1517. So that is an important trait. But there's a second part of that trait, um, which is really sort of like knowing your audience of who you're talking to. So as a founder, you may be able to talk backwards and forwards all day about your space, but you also have to be able to talk to an expert in your field, but you also need to be able to talk to just about anybody else because you're going to be building a team of people, some of whom are going to be super technical, some who are going to be technical in areas that are relevant to what you're doing, but are also sort of orthogonal to the original idea. You're going to have operations people who are really amazing at helping you build that business around what you're doing. And you're going to need to chat with everybody. So when founders come into us and pitch us, like especially deep tech stuff, we have a quantum computing company. This founder came in. He said, "What level of physics should I start at?" And we were like, "I don't know. Like, let's start at high school." He starts talking. We start realizing we can't keep up. We said, how about we go to middle school? And so he dumbed it down for us a bit. And this is a classic Michael moment. He stops, a few more minutes into the meeting, and he says to the founder, Ben from Atom Computing, he goes, "Talk to us like we're the dumbest golden retrievers you've ever met, because that's going to help us to keep up with you." And this founder, Ben, he's a great teacher. He was so good at giving us like primers in these areas. Now, me and Michael said we should have started a podcast that day of us going over what the founder said in our own terrible, uh, just like, okay, here's the analogy, and okay, there's gates and there's qubits and there's this other thing, and people would, everybody else would be laughing about, wow, how dumb are these people in this area? But at the same time, we found that ability to explain is very important. And there's one last piece of it, actually, which is the ability to explain what you're actually going to do. And this can be in a deep tech area. This can be in something that is a much easier lift. But we talk to a lot of founders who have a huge mission for what they're going to do, and they're like, "Yeah, this science, this research, this is going to do this." But then we always ask them, "What are you doing on Friday? Like, what are you doing today to get this started?" Some founders, and this tends to happen in sort of more the research sciencey people, they can only stay up in the upper sphere. They're like, "Oh, this is amazing because blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's totally amazing. But how are you going to get started?" And they can't get their feet back on the ground. And so they can't make a plan for what it's going to look like. And it doesn't mean your plan is going to be right. It just means you have something to start executing on and testing against reality. And some people are really not good at that reality piece of things. And that's something that I think our best founders are very good at.
There is so much to absorb from that. A few highlights just to try and compress it and tell me if I'm going off anywhere here. But it's about understanding the character and just understanding the person over years, which is something not a lot of angel investors or VCs do. Then this concept of hyperfluency, I think, is incredibly powerful, making sure that they're able to talk forward and backward in circles around anyone for their subject area, which shows they're competent and they're thinking this through at a level not many other people are. But then they're working on changing it now,
True, but you can just tell like they're eating, drinking, breathing it. It's like their whole consciousness is wrapped up in this thing.
and that shows their passion for this, and so them being able to figure out what it's gonna take to make this work. And then lastly, you said, what are they doing right now to actually turn it into action? Are they action-oriented for this instead of just being someone talking about this from an armchair?
Exactly. Yes. These are all very, very important factors for us.
All right, this is amazing. I could talk with you for like another 3 hours, Danielle, but I'm going to respect your time and say thank you. That is an amazing note to end on. I just so appreciate what you and Michael and everyone are doing. Just so appreciative of what you've already created for the world and what you're going to do going forward. So thank you for sharing all of this with us.
Yeah, no, of course it is. It's a pleasure to be part of this ecosystem with you, and we're going to do some great things together.